Hello, everyone, and welcome to our June 2025 Christian Fiction Fans. We are here with Sara Brunsvold to talk about The Extraordinary Deaths of Mrs. Kipp, which is just such a delightful book. So, let me tell you a little bit about Sara. Sara Brunsvold creates stories that speak hope, truth, and life. But influenced by humble women of God who find his fingerprints in the everyday. She does the same in her life and her storytelling. She has dreamed of being a novelist since middle school when she both discovered John Steinbeck and was encouraged to pursue creative writing by her language arts teacher. Sara creates stories that include modern issues through the lens of hope and unshakable faith. Sara won the 2020 American Christian Fiction Writers Genesis Award for Contemporary Fiction. The Extraordinary Deaths of Mrs. Kipp won both the Christie Award and the Carroll Award for Best Debut Novel. She lives with her family near Kansas City, Missouri, where she can often be spotted writing at a park or a library. Welcome, Sara.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Deb. It's a joy to be here.
Well, we're just so happy to have you. I have had this book on my TBR list for probably at least a year, and I just kept thinking, I'm going to get to it. I'm going to get to it. And then when I read it, I was just delighted. It was wonderful. So I said, we've got to do this one.
Yeah, well, praise God for that. Yes, I'm so glad that you finally found had the opportunity to spend time with Mrs. Kipp.
Yes. Yes. So we all have way too many books on our TBR list, but eventually we get there.
That's right.
So let's start by you sharing your journey to become an author. It sounds like you wanted to be an author for a really long time. So, how did it happen and how long did it take you? When did you start writing? Share a little bit of that background.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll jump off of what you read in my bio. First started dreaming about being a novelist when I was in middle school. And it was largely in thanks to my language arts teacher at the time, Mrs. Seward. She was the first one to encourage me to pursue creative writing. So I did. And I quickly fell in love with it. I discovered that I loved using my imagination to both to tell a story that engaged other people, but also just helped me process what I was experiencing and feeling in the world. And for a young teenager, that's an important thing to have that kind of outlet. And so that dream just sort of stayed with me, through college. I earned a degree in English with a writing minor, had big dreams of being a New York Times bestseller by the time I was 25. But life is life, and kind of went a different direction for many years. Got married, started a family, started a career that was adjacent to writing. But it really wasn't until 2012 that I got serious about this dream that just would not go away. And I felt like if this is really the direction that the Lord may be nudging me toward, then I needed to have some discipline around that. I needed to do my part in responding to that nudge. So 2012, I attended my first writers conference and discovered that, wow, I mean, this is doable. It's going to be a lot of work, but it's going to be doable. And I loved being around other people who were just as weird as me and saw the world in story. And I started learning so much from them. And so I was dabbling in writing nonfiction up until that point. But that was really the point that I went all in on fiction in 2012. And so Mrs. Kipp was my debut novel, and it came out in 2022. So it was almost exactly 10 years from the
Wow.
time that I got serious about pursuing fiction writing specifically to the time that my debut was published. So there's a lot that I left out, but it was a roller coaster in those 10 years, but that's the gist of it.
That's amazing. So in your bio, it also said that you won the Genesis Award in 2020. Was that for Mrs. Kipp or for another something that you've written?
It was for Mrs. Kipp. Yes, it was a slightly different title. The
Okay.
original title that I had when I turned in the manuscript to my publisher eventually was The Indelible Deaths of Mrs. Kipp.
Mm,
So one word changed to the final version. But yes, it did. That was the manuscript that won the Genesis.
interesting. So in the story, Mrs. Kipp talks about wanting to die an extraordinary death. Was that a different wording in the story? Was it indelible in the story when indelible was the title, or
No, I think that the wording in the story was the same,
okay?
and I think that's where my publisher Revell actually came back to me and said we would like to change indelible because we don't know that people will readily understand that word.
Yeah,
You know, it's one of those words you're like, oh, I think I know what that is, but I'm not
right.
quite sure.
A little less
Um,
accessible.
yes, extraordinary, and it just fit with the story
Yeah.
because that was a word that was used in the story. So
Hmm.
yeah, it was a perfect suggestion.
Interesting. So, from winning that Genesis Award, then did that propel you to find your agent and your publisher? Because 2 years later, then you're publishing it.
Yeah, so a little inside ball on this. So actually I already had an agent when I won the Genesis Award. So how the Genesis Award works is it has to be unpublished and you cannot be in a publishing contract by the deadline for entry, which I think it was in March.
Yeah.
And even though I was with an agent, I didn't have a publisher yet for the manuscript. So it was my very, very last moments of eligibility for the Genesis Award. And I think we actually ended up signing a contract in July of that
Okay.
year, if I'm remembering the timeline correct, or June, July.
Okay.
So I don't, it didn't necessarily um, result in a publishing offer, but I think it certainly helped. You
Yes.
know, helped the publisher know that they were making a pretty good decision on
Yeah.
the book. So it, yeah, I'm a big fan of the Genesis Award. I definitely encourage aspiring authors to enter and to go for it. And you get great feedback as well from the
Yeah.
judges.
I did just enter it this year. I
Nice.
did not final, but I got some really valuable feedback that I am
Yes.
tweaking some things right now in my manuscript. So,
There's
yeah.
so much benefit to entering the Genesis and other writing contests. A lot of benefit
Yes.
to that.
Yeah. Really good feedback. All right. So tell us a little bit about the Carol Award and the Christie Award, because this book also won those awards.
Yes, praise God. I don't know if I have fully processed that, even though it's been several years at this point. It's amazing to be nominated or to final for any awards, let alone those. And then to win, it was a little overwhelming. I mean, it was so surreal.
Yeah.
Um, but it's just such a perfect opportunity to bring it back to why the story, where the story really came from, and it was our Heavenly Father. I mean, he gives us that creativity, and he gives us the time and the talent and the skill to bring these stories to light that point back to him. And so it was just you know, I used both. You do acceptance speeches, which for an introvert is incredibly intimidating, but it did give me an opportunity to publicly, you know, stand before these crowds and point that glory back to him. So that was a sweet moment. And um but yeah, I if I can be honest, it's also a little bit of pressure, you know,
I'm sure.
when your debut is so well received, it makes that sophomore effort, and then
Yeah.
subsequent books, you just, you kind of, if you allow it, you definitely feel the
Right.
pressure a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. I believe that. A little imposter syndrome and thinking, what if
Oh,
the
for
next book's
sure.
not as good? Yeah, yeah,
For
I
sure.
can
Yes.
totally see that. So you talked about starting getting serious writing in 2012, and Mrs. Kipp came out in 2022. Was that the first manuscript that you wrote, or do you have more that are kind of sitting in the files of your computer? Or...
Oh, it was definitely not the first I wrote. I think it was the third.
Okay.
So in those other two, I call them my practice rounds.
Yep.
They're not going to see the light of day. You know, that was just me learning how to write a novel, learning
Yes.
how to write full length fiction, because
Hmm.
it takes a lot of time, a lot of practice
Yes.
to learn how to do it, and then to do it in such a way that people actually want to read it. You know,
Yeah.
um that's also important. So while those two practice manuscripts, they're not going to go anywhere, but there were parts of it that I have it, incorporated. Actually, I've lifted out of that,
Hmm.
this little idea here, I've kind of cherry picked through
Yeah.
those works and integrated them into subsequent novels. So
Yeah.
there was a benefit to it in that regard as well.
Katie Powner told us a similar story that she has some books that went unpublished, but now she's pulled parts of them out and put them into other novels. So they've still
Yeah,
been useful to her.
yeah.
Um, and I'm curious, which came first? This is kind of like the chicken or the egg story. The characters, or the story for you, for Mrs. Kipp?
The concept definitely came first.
Mm-hmm.
So this book was inspired partly by a call for volunteers that was advertised in a on a local website where people can go to find service opportunities. And this local hospice house was looking for volunteers to go through some training to learn how to sit at the bedsides of their residents and collect stories from their lives. And then those stories would be collected into a commemorative book for their loved ones.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's such a fascinating, in a very incredibly meaningful way to serve someone else. So that's kind of where the idea started. And so, the writer brain kicks in, and I started asking questions of, I always start with an idea and then ask the what if
Yeah.
questions. So what would what would motivate somebody to take on a role like that? And then what if they didn't do it voluntarily?
Yeah.
What if they were kind of forced into it? And then what if? And before you knew it, this story was starting to unfold about this young reporter who, as a form of discipline by her editor, is sent to interview this elderly hospice patient who has some hidden stories to tell, but she's going to have to work for it to get it out of
Yeah.
her. And so that's kind of how the book came together. And then the characters, once I kind of had an idea of the story and where I thought the plot might want to go, that's when I really dove deep into developing the characters and
Hmm.
their personalities, how they speak and their backstories, which is always fun to me. That's the fun part of writing to me, is diving deep into these fictional people.
And so this storyline also has this whole thread of the Laotian refugees. Where did that idea come from, and how did that get spun into your yarn?
Yes, so I knew that Mrs. Kipp, the character, needed to have a compelling backstory. She needed to have a compelling life event, something that she that was worth the work that
Yeah.
Aiden had to do to dig it out of her. And it just so happened, as God does that for us sometimes. There was a family friend at church who came up to me one day in the church hallway, and she handed me this newspaper clipping. And I could tell that this was a very treasured clipping. because it had been carefully folded and it was kind of yellowed. And I unfolded it, and it was this story about this Lao military couple in the spring of 1975. The communists overthrew the government of Laos, and they were essentially, this couple was essentially stranded in Leavenworth, Kansas. So that's a real story.
Yeah.
And that led to this very covert operation to rescue their kids from Laos and bring them
Hmm.
over. And so one family quickly turned into two, turned into three, turned into four. And before you knew it, there was this whole community of Lao refugees in Kansas City. And the reason our family friend had this clipping is because she helped this couple. She had
Ah.
befriended this couple back in 1975, and she was part of a interfaith women's ministry, or not interfaith, that's the wrong word, interdenominational. So
Hmm.
it was Christian, but all the
Hmm.
denominations. This women's ministry group here in Kansas City, who they kind of pooled together, and they collectively helped assist these refugees as sponsors to help bring them over. And then once they were here, help them assimilate and settle into Kansas City. So our family friend, her name is Karen, she was on the edge of that. She was
Yeah.
heavily involved in that work. And so I just thought that's the kind of story that I wanted Mrs. Kipp to have. You know,
Mhm.
very similar. It's not identical to Karen's journey, but very inspired by Karen's story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this also really touched me because I also have a friend from church who is Laotian, and
Oh,
just this very quiet, unassuming woman that you just, doesn't speak the language as well as a native English speaker, and she's very quiet and you would just never know. But she was also, I think her husband was a military leader, very well off, and then when the coup came in, they had to escape for their lives or be killed, and actually had a little baby that they took in a boat and had to I've since found out it was opium they had to put in her bottle and have her drink, because when they went across that river, there's people guarded on both sides of the river looking for any noise. And so she had to trust these people, give drugs to her baby, and hope that they made it. And then they were in a
yeah,
refugee camp, for I
yeah,
don't know how long,
yeah,
before they ever made it to America. It's just such a remarkable story to me, that
yeah,
the sacrifices people make to get out of horrible situations and end up in our country. And then, like it said in your story, they end up doing the grunt work, and they're often looked at as less than because they're just cleaning the toilets
yeah,
in the buildings, and flipping burgers or whatever. But yet in their country, they were very well off and very
mhm.
well respected, and you just don't have any idea. So,
Yes, yeah, it was such fascinating history to dive into. I mean, Karen's story, and talked to her at length for hours. And she shared her family photo, her personal photos, her personal artifacts, but just diving deep, using the library resources to go back to additional newspaper articles, and both here on the home front, and then also what was happening in other parts of the country and around the world. It is fascinating history, and I'm glad you brought that up. That it was that these folks were. It's such a tragedy all the way around, but the indomitable spirit that these refugees largely had was incredibly inspiring. And so that was one thing that I wanted to be sensitive of when I was writing this book. And it was definitely something Karen encouraged me to be sensitive about, is that Karen and the women were not the heroes. They were
right.
not supposed to be the people who were being lauded. It really was supposed to be the refugees. And so I tried to ensure that that came through in the story, that the real heroics were done on the part of the refugees, and in everything that they went through and sacrificed and risked, and then gave in a very humble and a humble way to their new home country.
Yeah.
It was very touching history to explore.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine, and I don't think very many Americans can imagine. We're most of us very middle class. We have a very good life. And if we had to leave our country, go somewhere where we didn't speak the language and
Yeah.
maybe our degrees and work experience weren't as recognized as they are here in our home country, like we wouldn't know what to do.
Yep.
I couldn't survive trying to learn another language. It's just, yeah,
Yeah.
it's remarkable what
It
they
is
do.
remarkable. Yes.
So, you've told us there's a little bit of kernel of truth in some of this fictional story, but sometimes there's also a little piece of the author in her characters. Is there a little piece of you that you would say is like Clara Kipp or like Aiden?
Well, I don't know about Clara Kipp. I mean, she's maybe who I aspire to be.
There you
I
go.
definitely think that I would love to be Mrs. Kipp when I grow up. But with Aiden, I definitely see parts of me as that young 20 something where death was incredibly uncomfortable, and being around end of life, largely because I didn't understand it. I was scared of it. Um, so I definitely see that part of me in Aiden. And also Aiden has big dreams of her own. She has huge aspirations of what she wants to do with her journalist career. And some of it isn't quite feasible, but she's young and idealistic enough to not think that way, and not allow herself to think that way. And so I definitely was like that as well in my young 20s. Just think again, I wanted to be a New York Times bestseller by the time I was 25 years old, right? And it kind of crushed me when that didn't happen. But one of the things that Mrs. Kipp teaches her is that there are much better dreams to dream.
Yeah.
And she shares what her lifelong dream has always been. And even though the Lord didn't allow her to have that specific one, it was still a beautiful life that she led. And um, so those are the two things that I definitely think probably pulled from my own experience and my own personality to flow into Aiden.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And so let's talk a little bit more about Mrs. Kipp, who you and I both aspire to be when we grow up. So, how did you come up with a character like that who is just so giving to the point that she's on hospice and she's going across the hall to try and comfort the other guy who's going to die before she is? Like,
Mhm.
how do you come up with that character?
Well, Mrs. Kipp is not based just on one person. She's kind of an
Hmm.
amalgam of many older women, older sisters in Christ that I have
Hmm.
been blessed to know. I count my late mother-in-law as one of them. I mean, she definitely had that been to her as well, that even when she was going through cancer treatments, she was always thinking of her family. She
Hmm.
was bringing cookies to her oncology team, and making sure they knew who Jesus was. And
Yeah.
so I and then when people were visiting her so she was in a hospice house, and when people were visiting her at the hospice house, just making sure that they were comfortable and they felt welcome. um so definitely see some of my late mother-in-law Sue in Mrs. Kipp. There's some of Karen, my family friend. I mean, Karen's got that just let's do this kind of
Yeah.
mentality. She's a riot. So there's definitely some of her in Mrs. Kipp. So I think just taking all those best parts of
Yeah.
the women who have influenced me in making this character, I think that's where she came from.
Yeah. Yeah. She was just so delightful and spunky. And I was just like, I feel like she's my new best friend, even though she's fictional.
She means a lot to me too. I 100% agree.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your writing process. Do you have routines or rituals that kind of help you keep productive? Are you one of those write every day at a certain time of day? Or you also have kids at home, right?
I
So I'm sure
do.
that's a balance. And now that it's summer break, especially.
Yes. Yes. I don't necessarily have a routine. So every day is just a little bit different because you kind of I am in that season of life with kids at home, still have a day job, have a family, have a house to take care of. Um, I am in that season of life where I just have to remain flexible day by day. So I could have the best laid plans about things, and then somebody has a need. My
Yes,
greatest ministry is to my family. And so if they have a
absolutely.
need, it takes precedent.
Yeah,
Um, so I have learned to take the approach of try to get at least 30 minutes of writing time um, in a day whenever possible, and be grateful for that daily bread of time. But don't give myself grace if that
yeah,
doesn't pan out, because I'm still doing necessary work. I'm still
right.
doing things that I am meant to do, even if I'm not putting words on a page. But that said, I do, and my husband is so good about encouraging me to do this, finding those large blocks of time wherever I can. So maybe that means stowing away in a hotel room for a couple of nights and just focus heads down on writing, not
Yeah,
having to cook for anyone, not having to cart anyone around or anything like that. It's just me, laptop and whatever story I'm working on at the moment. So I do, he's so encouraging to ensure that I am taking those regular, we call them writing retreats, to make sure that I have that time to
yeah.
focus on this writing ministry.
Yeah. So when you started writing back in 2012, was it like, I don't know if you had kids back then.
Mhm.
Were you doing it after they went to bed? Or you get up super early to try and do it, or
Yeah,
both,
so
all of the above?
all the above, really. Yeah. So my girls are teenagers now, so it's a little bit easier because they're self-sufficient and they can take themselves where they need to go. At least my older one can. Back in 2012, I had a preschooler, and let's see, no, they were both preschoolers at the time in 2012. So yeah, it was a little bit harder to find those large blocks of time. But that's really when I started learning to use nap time, very effectively. And I could not bring myself to write in the morning. For me, that's my quiet time. So I kind of reserve more early mornings for that. But yeah, after they go to bed, in even back then, we were kind of getting into that rhythm as a family of, um, are there times where I can sneak away for a night or two to write or to go to a writers conference? A little more infrequent back then,
Sure.
um, but yeah, we were already starting to kind of set that pattern. So I think, yeah, like I said, just it depends on what season of life you're in. It depends
Yeah.
on the day, but
Yeah.
just being responsive to day by day and
Hmm.
taking it with grace.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It sounds like you're finding a good harmony in your life. I've heard before that
Trying
balance is
to,
maybe not a good, because if one goes up and one goes down, but if you
yeah.
think of it as a harmony, like in music, it all flows together and works in the end.
Yeah, I like that analogy better. It is more accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's lots of notes, but they all come together.
Yeah.
Um, were there any challenges that you faced when writing this book or any of your other books, and how did you overcome them?
It seems to be and I bet every Christian author faces this. There seems to be some sort of pushback with every book, whether that's, family issues coming at you, or maybe it's illness, or maybe it's day job issues. There always seems to be something. In
Hmm.
every book that I write, there's going to be a challenge. And maybe it's also just internal, maybe it's fear, maybe it's
Yeah.
that raging imposter syndrome.
Hmm.
There always seems to be some kind of pushback. And with Mrs. Kipp, it was a challenging family time for us. It was actually one of the hardest seasons that we had walked through as a family. And part of that was my father-in-law was in hospice at the time that I was writing this book, and actually his hospice nurse was a godsend. I mean, I interviewed him at length just to get the hospice details
Yeah.
accurate. Um, so yes, there was a lot of family things going on. There was grief
Hmm.
at that time, some pretty deep grief. But what I learned as that middle schooler who was just exploring fiction writing, it is such a great way for me to take everything that is going on and attempt to make sense of it, and attempt to make sense of it in a way that I could be encouraging to somebody else.
Yeah.
So it was just a sweet opportunity to write this book.
I love I love that. Are there any authors or other books that have influenced your writing style or your career, or just ones that you love? Because we're always looking for more authors to bring on to our book group.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you've mentioned a couple of them already. So John Steinbeck was pretty formative
Hmm.
in getting me interested in fiction. So I actually discovered him in middle school, and I was absolutely fascinated with how he told stories and the masterful way that he had figured out this craft, and it evoked emotion from people. And I knew from a young age I wanted to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think he was one of the early influences on me
Hmm.
to learn the craft. I count Harper Lee as an influence. Um, and To Kill a Mockingbird is one of my favorite books of all time. Some of my favorite reads, Little Women. I love the way that Little Women is just so full of faith elements, and that advice from the mom to the daughters, and but it's just done in such a way that it just flows with the story, and
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so perfect. Um, but I think some of my, if I kind of skip forward to who are my auto buys authors,
Yeah.
you mentioned Katie Powner. I mean, she was she's definitely several steps ahead of me in my
Yeah.
career, and she's kind of been a source of advice and
Hmm.
inspiration in how she has shaped her career, and how she interacts with readers. I mean, I speak very highly of her for a reason. So that's kind of an auto buy for me. And
Yeah.
then Amy Lynn Green,
Mhm.
her World War II novels
Yeah.
are auto buys. In
We
fact,
had her on in February.
oh, nice.
Yeah, so we've
Yeah.
had both of those, all both very good. Yeah.
Yes. And then I think the last one I would mention is I don't think she gets the spotlight nearly as much as she should, but Robin W. Pearson.
Okay.
She writes Southern fiction, a lot of family dynamic, family conflict books. She's incredible. I mean, she's an incredible human being and an incredible writer. I think she deals with some things that you don't often see in Christian fiction.
Mhm.
And I think her first book won the Christie as well. And just, I really enjoy her books as well. I think I have all but one of her books.
Right. I'm going to look her up. The name is ringing a bell, so I will probably when I look, I'll have all her names,
Yeah,
all
you'll
her
probably like,
titles on my Amazon wish list already or something.
yeah,
But
yeah.
well, good. We will definitely look her up. So, I want to give a moment to Linda if she has any questions or comments that she would like to ask that I we haven't talked about yet. You have to unmute.
All the details.
There.
There you go.
It finally popped up. It was not there. I didn't know how to get it. Um, no question, but I just found it so different from all the other Christian books we've been reading, which have some you would hardly know they were Christian fiction, but you had so much of it in your book, and it was perfect. I
Oh,
really loved it.
oh, that's wonderful to hear. Yes, and I think books come in all stripes, and but yes, it is encouraging to hear readers say that they do appreciate the heavy faith elements of the story. I think that's, I mean, that's how the story wanted to be told. I think every story demands to be told a certain way. And for me, it just made, for this book, I should say, for this book, it just made absolute sense that the faith was in the forefront. I mean, that's who Mrs. Kipp was, and that's who she was hoping Aiden would become one day. And so that's very heartwarming, and it's an answer to prayer when readers say that they appreciate that faith element, that it encourages them and edifies them. That is definitely an answer to prayer.
She was a wonderful character.
She was, yeah, she's hard to top. I have to say, she's a pretty special gal.
I mean, I think it's because of the character of Mrs. Kipp that you were able to put that level of Christian themes in. It has to be appropriate to the character, otherwise it comes across as just preaching or something like that. But that was
Right.
so who Mrs. Kipp was that it would have been wrong to not be like that.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that's a great point. It has to be natural to the story.
Yes.
It has to feel like, you don't want the reader to ever feel like, oh, am I in church now? Like I thought I was reading a novel. Um, so yeah, and praise God that the story flowed the way that it did, and it just melded so nicely into the story.
Yeah, I love that. So now you've also written the Divine Proverb of Streusel. Is that it? Did I get that
That's
right?
it. Yeah.
I read that one also, but there's a new one coming out tomorrow. So
Yes.
I'm sure you have a copy right there you can hold up for us,
Oh,
probably.
oh shoot.
Others,
I don't, but I can grab one if you want me to.
Grab one and then tell us about it.
Okay. Here we go. I should have thought I had my Mrs. Kipp book, but I
Ah,
didn't have this one. But yes, so here it is. This is the Atlas of Untold Stories. So it's about a mom and her two adult daughters who go on a 9-day road trip around America's heartland, visiting different places associated with American literature. And while these fictional stories definitely influence their perspective of themselves and what they're going through in life, it's the untold stories between them that are going to shape them even more. So, yes, this one comes out June 17th, and I already have plans for what I'm going to do, what I'm going to eat, what am I going to drink, to celebrate the big day.
you have a day job. Do you have to go to work tomorrow, or are you taking it off to still have to go to work?
I do have, but I'm taking, it's not as many hours as I normally
Okay.
would work. So, yeah, I definitely want to have plenty of time to celebrate with readers online and with
Yeah.
my family here at home.
Yeah. And so do you do any kind of a online Zoom book launch or in-person book launch events you've got planned?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. I'm actually going to have an both. I'm going to have an in-person book launch on June 28th here at a local indie bookstore in town. It was kind of cool. The owner, we used to be in Mothers of Preschoolers together back in the day. So it's just kind of a fun full circle moment.
Circle, yeah.
So yeah, so that's on June 28th. And then I am going to have I am working on a virtual launch party that I'm gonna open up to my newsletter subscribers first tomorrow. Um and that will be in July.
Super. Very, very fun. Well, we hope that it is very successful. I know you're through, is this Bethany Baker Bookhouse?
It's Revell, which is part of
Which is
the
also part of
Baker
Baker.
Publishing Group.
And
Yeah.
they seem to do a really good job with the pre-sale and stuff like
Oh my
that. So you
goodness.
probably have lots of people already getting their books and starting to read. And so
Yeah, and it's so fun to see. People are already posting about it. They're posting, my book has arrived, and oh, it just, yeah, it just tickles me. I just
I
love seeing
bet.
that.
I bet. That's so exciting. Really fun. Okay, so before we go, we want to remind everybody to please go online, leave a review, whether it's on Goodreads or Amazon or wherever you buy your books, because that really helps authors. And then, Sara, would you tell us where is the best place for us to connect with you?
Well, I would love to connect with readers. The best place to find me is on my website, actually, sarabrunsvold.com. I have a place where I have some free downloads that you can explore, more about Mrs. Kipp, more about the Atlas of Untold Stories. And there's also a form on there that you can reach out to me. And so if there's a question that's burning a hole in your mind, just shoot it my way. I'd be happy to answer.
And I will put the links to all of that both on the YouTube recording and in the email that we send out to everybody so that they can just pop on over to your website, sign up for your newsletter, and then maybe they can get on for that Zoom launch in July.
Yes.
That would be so fun.
That would, yeah. Love to see him there.
Well, thank you so much for being here tonight, Sara, and for sharing all about this delightful story with the delightful Mrs. Kipp and sharing about you and your journey. We really appreciate having you.
Well, thank you so much for having me tonight.